So welcome everybody, my name is Paul. I'm a country realtor in the western part of Virginia near Lexington. And I talk a lot about homesteading because I love that kind of lifestyle, the rural lifestyle, not the suburban lifestyle. And I talk a lot about building your homestead, finding a homestead, and I try to address all kinds of questions about buying and selling real estate, particularly in the state of Virginia. Now today I'm going to talk a little bit about designing a homestead. I've made other videos a little bit about this, but a homestead is totally unlike a regular suburban home. A lot of us grew up in a home and we really had basically just a mini version of what used to be the way our parents and grandparents used to live. And I'm a realtor, so I get to see a lot of homes. And honestly, there's some homes I see, the bigger they are, the more stuff they have. And if you have a big house, chances are over the years, you'll fill it up with a lot of stuff. And what happens is, there's a mix of use of spaces, okay? For example, let's say a garage. Okay, a garage is a great place to park your car and so on. But if you've seen some of the garages that I've seen, there's just stuff hanging everywhere. It's like, hey honey, whatever it is you do with this, just throw it in the garage. Well, let's build some more shelves in the garage. Well, what are we going to do now? We're going to have our yard sale. So there's a whole compaction problem that happens when you try to take all the things that used to be in a homestead, say your animals and your storage and your firewood and all those things, and you had them spread around the property in different ways, and now you have this home and you go, oh, I got to put my stuff somewhere. So you got to have a garage, you got to have a basement, you got to have a utility room, you got to have a storage room, an attic, you got to put all your stuff away, and you got to have everything, and even your pet stays in the house now, and you got to have a door for the pet to get out and in, and you got a special place to feed the pet, and it's a whole thing just crammed into one house. And it's really hard to build one particular structure that serves every purpose that a household needs. That's why people didn't live that way before. They had a household that was spread out. They have, in some countries even to this day, they have a kitchen. You don't sleep next to your kitchen. The kitchen's a little building. You walk about 20 feet over there, and that's where all the kitchen stuff is done. So that leaves the kitchen, when you go back to your house, you don't have all those smells and everything. So I want to talk a little bit about design, and I'm going to go a little bit through a couple of books here. I love recommending books. I'll make them real brief, and then you can browse through some of the other things, on your own time. I'm going to talk a little bit about storage ideas. Now, I'm going to browse through this book. I've looked at quite a few of these books, but if you saw all the homes that I've seen, I mean, you see, they make it look really nice for the book, you see? They got everything just all right and dusted and clean. But believe me, if you have a homestead and you're going in and out of that house all the time and you got mud on your feet, or you got dogs or cats or God knows who, and children coming in and out, maybe even mice come in the house, it's not going to look like one of those ideal home magazines. So you have to organize your space in a way that, like, functionality makes a difference. For example, I told you about kitchens, but everywhere in your household, where are you going to put your tools? You see, now ideally, I'm going to go through this in a bit here, but you have a special place for your tools, maybe in a shed or a workshop that's not in your house, So I'll recommend this book here. Look at storage ideas. I want to recommend, this is a really kind of you'll see what I mean by when I integrate this type of thinking into designing a homestead. But this goes in about the various designs and how they harmonize with the human nature, with life. You see, there's proportions, there's flow, there's, if you look at animals and flowers, they have sort of integrated design, and there's a flow and so on. So when you look at a piece of property, and here's an example. I had this property I sold last year. There's 45 acres. Now, I encourage people to get online and start looking at some of the satellite photos of wherever they happen to be live, even if you're not going to move anytime soon. You see this piece of property here? You can see here this line up here where the road is, over here. That's the driveway, and then there's a house, the old farmhouse. Now, once upon a time, see all that clearing? All this was cleared down here as well, once upon a time. You see, there was more acreage, and see over here, there's a stream along here. That's the edge of the property, and all these trees are in the way of that beautiful stream. because they just kind of grew, and after a while they brush hog and they mow a little bit, and what happens is it encroaches little by little. Now on this side here, these two edges where there's a fence over here, but on this side here it's kind of raw, you see. So the plan is, okay, let's clear out some of these trees and increase the size of that field tremendously, and you got 45 more acres for the woods and everything, and you have like a nice stream there you can get access to if you just trim down some of this stuff. Now the house in the old days, this is a ravine up here, and I'll show you the terrain in a minute, but this is hilly over here, and there's some fruit trees here and some chestnut trees in the back, but there's water that runs down the ravine, and once upon a time there was a spring that came down here. So we're going to go in and find it. Someone I know bought this property. So I'm going to go through a few more diagrams here just so you can get an idea about what's good to do on when you have a piece of property. Take a look at how it's laid out. Here's that same property. And in this case here, what we are looking at is this the road. This is the stream down here in the road. The house is right here. And then you can see there's a steep ravine down this gully right here. Water flows down through. Up here there's a beautiful building site. And then this is hilly. So there's a road that goes up here, a little logging road. But you can see by the terrain that this was more flat down here. And you can harvest a little bit more of the trees down here and make a bigger field. You see? And then all this around here is other land, but it's not occupied. So I suggest people get some printouts of their property. Here's a little detail of where the house siding was on the top there. That's a beautiful place to build a house someday. I took some, using the satellite photos on the GIS system, I actually wrote down exactly what points were the longitude and latitude so I can identify exactly where a place is. If I want to go find it, I can use my little compass, my GPS gadget, and I can find out, well, that's the place I saw on the map. And then another little diagram here, just make drawings, you know, put color in there if you want, where the ponds or the streams or the roads are, and just kind of have that as your record, because as you build your homestead, you're going to want to have access to certain maps. So next time you think about, okay, where are we going to put the fence, where are we going to put the chickens, and so on. Now, I made a little drawing here, and this is just a real sample here, but let's see if I can demonstrate here. I made a little drawing. I suggest people use graph paper. 1 inch is 40 feet in here. And just a real quick drawing of kind of a nice household setup where you have this house here, and let's say the kitchen faces east. I actually lived in a house that had a beautiful kitchen window facing east, but unfortunately there were some trees over here that shaded it. But anyway, you put a deck on the back facing south, so this is south up here, so you get the beautiful sunlight, and I put a little pond in here, and a little garden here, and then a chicken hutch here, and a place for the larger animals here, and then the little forest of a little bit of a cluster of fruit trees over here, and a driveway and a garage, and they mark the pathways of like, okay, a standard walk. You get on the house and you want to go down to the garden shed. Okay, you go down this way. You go down to the horse this way. You just make little drawings and see where they go, kind of like get the flow, so the movement around the property is really smooth. And when you think about mowing the property or trimming it and so on, you also want to think about where you're going to put the trees and bushes. You see, make a little diagram of your property, and it doesn't have to be final. You can change it anytime you want. Just give them a rough idea, but leave some room between the structures. You don't want two little structures like so close together, like your chicken hutch and then another shed. And you just like to have that flow of energy between the structures so you can walk around, and there might be animals and kids playing on the property. And same thing with dogs. You might want to figure out where you're going to put your dog fence if you have a fence, and so on. So all of these little tools, and I use various kinds of drawing tools. Of course, I use something like this, where I can make different sizes and structures or different shapes or whatever. I can put the angles in there and so on. So that's a little bit about designing your home. And I want to think about a little bit about the overall picture, and I made another video about it, about the buying of the land itself. Before you even start a structure, a household or a homestead, you want to think about the planning, the long-term planning, because it might take you 20 years to build a really fantastic homestead. So you can start having some strategy very early on about where you're going to actually put things. And as I said before, you can change it as you go along here. But think about where you're going to put trees, because as in this diagram here, I had on the north side of the house, this is the north side, a row of fir trees because they block the wind. And they also insulate from the road. So if you're going to have like a road, if you happen to have a road near your house, I suggest you put your house back quite a few feet from the road, honestly. I like to be a couple hundred feet back from a road. But in case you can't get that, just have some either evergreen bushes or some evergreen trees that grow up and block that view and stay green and also block the wind. And then if it's on the north side of the house, that's a good place to put something like that to block the wind. Now, there's more sophisticated things to get into, because you can think about like some of the geometry. I just love geometry, and to make it like really exotic, make a beautiful flow. I mean, you notice how there's countries like Japan, there's gardens, and all around the world the people put amazing attention to their gardens and make the property just look absolutely spectacular. And I've seen a lot of farms as I drive by in Virginia, and some of them are really well laid out, and some of them are just kind of plopped a house there, and they got some land, and they're just happy enough to have a little space for their house, so they didn't really think about whether it was this way or that way or facing the sun or whatever. They just stuck it there. But a lot of people in the old days, the way they built their houses, they had like an east, west, north orientation. I personally love it. In the kitchen, if I'm washing dishes in the morning, I'm getting up in the morning, I like to look out that window and the sun's coming up there and the whole kitchen is lighted up with beautiful sunshine. And then if you have a window on the south side, that's even another bonus, because the sun goes around across the sky, and if it comes up on the east, the next thing you know, by noon around, will be shining in on the south side. Now, on the south side of the house can be very warm in some areas especially, so you might want to put like an awning over something. Like a deck is a wonderful thing to have on the south side of the house, because you can be there and enjoy the beautiful sunshine, and especially if it's on the back of the house where you have all that privacy. No one can see you from the road or whatever because you're in the back of the house, but you're on your deck and you can be sunning yourself. It's really a nice way to lay out a house. Now, places like things like gardens, you want to be able to have room around the garden to mow, to walk and enjoy the garden, to go around and tend to the garden. You need pathways. If you have all the garden in one big space with no pathways, you can't weed it, and it's just going to be a mess. So you want to have nice flow. So might as well design some nice little pathways through your garden and have some kind of structure for it so that it looks attractive, and it becomes a nice asset if you try to sell a home and it has a really nice garden. Believe me, you know, a lot of people, there are people honestly that they don't want a very sophisticated garden because they know that they're not ready to maintain it. So if you have a whole lot of really decorative shrubs on your property, that could be actually a nuisance in a way, because if you're just trying to do your homestead and do your gardening and all that, and every so often you got to trim those little bushes just right so that they look just right, then that's going to be a little bit of an extra chore that you maybe not want. So maybe, you know, get some sort of like a willow tree is a really beautiful tree. You can get a dwarf willow, a rhododendrons. They just, you know, they bloom beautiful flowers. Any kind of flowers on your property. Again, the design has to do with life-giving, life supporting and encouraging types of structures, and your plants and the flowers that you put there attract the bees and all the wildlife and so on. Same with a pond. If you can have a pond on your property, I tell you, it's very hard to find a pond on your property. I'm a realtor, trust me. If you have a pond on your property, it's probably a farm, or it's, you know, they aren't very common. One of the reasons they're not very common is because a big pond is a very dangerous thing, because if the dam ever breaks, it'll just wash down the hill. And there are kinds of structures, there are kinds of situations where the way the land is positioned and the way that is kind of a natural bowl. In that case, a pond can be a very stable situation, and you can make a pond quickly these days if you want to, but think carefully about your pond, because where you put it and what it attracts, there's dangers involved in a pond, for example, if you have little kids or so on, and you don't want like the neighbor's kids falling in your pond and so on. So there's certain aspects about that that you have to think about. A stream is another good option. If you can find a stream, like in Virginia, there's tons of streams. That's a water element that I really believe in the more esoteric, beautiful ways of making an elegant homestead. You can make a water feature go down a couple of little waterfalls, small things, and you don't need a huge pond to attract birds and wildlife. Actually, some of these really small decorative ponds that maybe even 10 feet wide, they'll attract a substantial amount of wildlife coming to drink, and birds and bees and so on, and insects and so on, even amphibians like frogs and so on. So again, think a lot about how you're going to design your property over the years. And it's a fun thing to have a big piece of raw property. I personally have never bought a piece of raw property. I've sold them, but boy, I think like, well, that guy's got a lot of work to do as soon as he gets his property. But yeah, whatever, you know. And it is a big chore, because if you want to make a driveway into your property and you got big trees there, yeah, that could be a real problem if you have a whole bunch of them. Now, fortunately, there are a lot of areas that have been lumbered and timbered for a long time, and the trees aren't that big. They might be a foot big or something. Okay, you can deal. And especially if you have the 5 or 6 inches or whatever, you can make a pathway through and have a driveway. But again, really, really large trees, they just get bigger. So if you have a large tree near your house, it's just going to get bigger as you're there. And so in some cases, a large tree will totally shade a house. And that can be a really awkward situation, because if you want to put solar on your roof, forget it. You know, certain kinds of trees will just block, and they'll just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I was involved in a property one time not too long ago where actually it belonged to my friend of mine. The one next door, there was a neighbor next door who had 2 huge trees in their really small lot. They just grown up, and someone had renovated the house totally and they flipped it. But there was these 2 giant trees, and they were just way too big. So they must have spent a good chunk of money getting rid of some of those trees. The one big tree. And even then, there was still the one big tree that was pretty big, and it wasn't a very big yard. And then they put a shed in the yard too. So, yeah, trees are nice, but you know, you got to deal with them. So I also suggest planting fruit trees. Again, my little ideal scenario here, have a little group of fruit trees here, apples, pears, peaches, whatever works. And I encourage people to look up and get interested in some of the design, and look at old farms. Look at books of old farms and diagrams, and drive around neighborhoods where you're going to buy a property or where you live, and just see how people have laid out their properties. And I see properties sometimes, I say, man, that guy really did a great job laying out this property. I've met some people like that. They just worked for years, they trimmed the trees, they made the trails, they laid it all out, they had everything, just a beautiful homestead. And boy, that's a lot of work, and it took sometimes years, especially if you're just working by yourself. So again, think carefully about designing your homestead. Think about the design, the shapes, the movement on the property, and make drawings, use tools. Look at satellite pictures of your property and the area and the terrain, and then you'll have a maximum benefit of your household as you unfold it. And it's just a beautiful thing to see, because I see homesteads in many different stages of unfoldment, and some of them have declined over the years. They once were big and they come down this way, and then there's others that are smaller, and you can see them like adding little sheds or something. So it goes both ways. I really, please come to Virginia to homestead, because it's a wonderful way of living, and it's really great for the families and so on. So come to Virginia and come back to my channel and buy and sell real estate in Virginia. Thanks for listening. I hope to see you in some of my other videos.